Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Gustavo from Trial of the Force. Very excited to talk to you guys. So my question is for both of you. Andor so far has been a very precise and deliberate show. The pacing has been very intentional until we get like these moments that just hit you like a sledgehammer. Especially episode 10, we get a line from Luthen towards the end of the episode where he says, "I've made my mind a sunless place. I share my dreams with ghosts." Like moments like that just like really capture what the feeling and theming of the episode is and the series as a whole. So my question is like, how do these moments come about? Like, how do we decide what characters kind of have like these moments that just punch you in the face and just like make your jaw drop?
I don't know. It's like sort of like asking, professional ice skater, like, how do you do like a triple Lutz? A lot of practice and a lot of falling down until you get it right. I mean, first and foremost, it all starts with Tony Gilroy. He walked into the writer's room with about an 80-page Bible, a very extensive and detailed idea of what he wanted to do over the course of the season. There were some big gaps along the way, which he admitted that we needed to figure out, and some things that he brought in that we ultimately tossed and came up with better, I hope, better ideas for. But he started with a very clear vision, and characters like Luthen Rail, for instance, or Cyril and Deirdre, and some of the others along the way, pretty fully formed, and so what Danny and I were trying to do was just help flesh that out, deepen it, ask questions, poke holes, see if we could replace really good ideas with even better ones. But Tony's vision and leadership really gave us a running start. When you talk about something like Kino Lloyd's arc over the course of these 3 seasons, the notion of a prison was a pretty vague one. We knew that, okay, here's a guy who's just on the Aldhani raid. Now he's on the run. Naturally, it's most interesting if something stops him being on the run. What's the most extreme version of that? Being thrown into a prison. How do we do a prison that isn't like every other prison movie you've ever seen in your life? It started almost from a very rudimentary place of well, most prisons are sort of dark and damp and lots of shadows and dirty. What if this one's like super bright and clean? If most prisons have lots of guards, what does a prison look like that has a very few guards? How do you pull that off? Maybe it's a factory. Maybe they're building something. Who knows? And Kino is a character that we developed in the room from scratch. And layer by layer. First, it's like, well, maybe he's a foreman. Maybe he buys into the system. Maybe Cassian has to convince this guy in order to have a chance of getting out. And maybe now he becomes this opportunity for a mini arc where you see how over a very short amount of time, someone can go from plugging into the system as a sort of automaton into becoming a rebel, which is part and parcel of the larger story that we're trying to tell with Cassian. And so you kind of just almost approach it in these very rudimentary, simple ways, layer up, you're learning sort of, I don't know why I brought up ice skater analogy, because I know nothing about ice skating. But you got to do one twirl before you can do 2 and then 3. And eventually you hit something and you land it and you feel like that feels right, so.
Hello. I wanted to bring up something, Beau, that you mentioned at your BAFTA screenwriters lecture, because I've studied and worked in theater my whole life. And in that talk, you mentioned how discoveries made in earlier episodes can have an influence and ripple effect on scripts that are still in development, much like a theatrical production process. So for either of you, have there been any standout moments like these while you both were working on Andor? Like any moments that you revisited or rediscovered while writing that were influenced from earlier scenes or earlier episodes that you may have worked on?
I think Sanne is better for this one because she's been in the trenches with Tony since before I arrived and long after I finished my last draft on the script. So you've witnessed everything, Sanne.
I think certainly for all the really strong vision and kind of overriding kind of story arc that Tony brought into the room, and that were then fleshed out with the help of his trusted collaborators, Beau and Dan, wherever we took it at the writers' room, of course, then the really hard work starts, because then everybody took these episodes away and then made them into an outline, and then of course really digging deep to writing the script. And I think things evolve and you really dig deep for, finding the broader, of a past is, and getting that right is, was kind of quite, dynamically and quickly achieved when you have, three very strong, creative, people in a room, that really know and trust each other. And, the speed that was actually the creative feeding of each other was kind of really fast. But then when everybody dug in deeper, of course, you come across other questions and new things, and they constantly feed back and forward and good ideas. Then then you feed them back, backwards. And I think that is that evolving thing when you strive for perfection and finding a very intricate, multi-layered, piece with a huge, with a lot of players within the way. I think that is very much part of the process. And if you pay attention to that and really benefit from what you find and keep on challenging, the own process, you come, hopefully, you get to something very, complex and multi-layered and rewarding at the end.
And I think I got lucky too, because the prison is such a big build, and Sanne actually had to make that happen with Luke. That I believe the prison block was shot last, right, Sanne?
It was shot last because we were quite contained, and it seemed the right way, to kind of finish the whole show. But it also really allowed, for Beau writing, when you're dealing with something, where anything that you could write, and when you dug deeper into it, when you were left with actually having to produce the scripts, we had to create, and Luke was our designer, and we had to, it's a constant feeding back. Okay, if I get to go to that corner, and how does that do this, and how would this work in the prison? And it's a constantly evolving thing, and having that time for that very specific world to kind of evolve and to be written, and for us to be then allowed to able to create it. It was a good place at the to shoot it last.
Yeah, well, and so I'm lucky that it benefited from this incredible cast. It now had months working together, Sanne and Luke and everyone else. Here was, I basically got to benefit from, this is the final push here. And in a way, I guess all of those prisoners escaping Narkina 5 at the end, it was also for all of you, like, we're finally wrapping production.
One way out.
One way out.
We printed T-shirts for everybody with it on.
I'm Sam with Tatooine Sons. First, episode 10 is an absolute masterpiece. I think we can all agree with that. And Andy Serkis's performance could easily win him an Emmy, in our opinion. But I've just got a quick two-part question. First, did you have Andy Serkis in mind when you wrote that speech to the prisoners? And second, when he was leading them and chanting "One Way Out," as y'all were just saying, were you already considering the harsh reality that Kino Loy can't swim and potentially doesn't make it out of the prison himself?
Great questions, and I dig you guys' setup there. Like you've really got the lighting in. Yeah,
Thank you.
Great questions. When we're developing characters, especially ones that were developed in the room from scratch, the way Kino was, sometimes you might bang around like, what is this person like? Who might play them? And sometimes you're talking about an actor that might be from 50 years ago or something. You're trying to get a sense of a vibe. You're not necessarily trying to cast it in the room. Wasn't thinking of Andy or any actor when per se, specifically, like we're writing this towards this actor. But we were definitely going for a particular vibe. And what we did know was that we wanted to write one hell of a cameo arc, that this was for something that a really great guest actor could come in and essentially kind of headline those 3 episodes as the face of this prison. We wanted to write a role that could attract someone amazing. And so luckily for us, Andy was available and wanted to do it, and it felt like winning the lottery, because we were like, if we don't get someone of that caliber, I don't think the prison will work.
But also, I think eventually, when the 3 scripts, were kind of, all there and had just, evolved, he really became somebody that I think we all felt, really drawn to, and it kind of became a natural bit of casting for us. And then we were lucky that he felt the same about our show and that part, and and the rest is for everybody to enjoy.
In terms of the very end, I can't swim. No, I mean, these are these things where you don't start with that necessarily. First is like, okay, what's the journey this guy has? He's plugged into the system. If he's not pro empire, he's kind of a shill for it, out of pure self-interest. And we're going to have a prison break at the end, and he's going to be leading the way. That's quite an arc over the course of 3 episodes. But you're always looking, how do you subvert expectations? How do you, in a good way, and replace them with something better? How do you have the most emotional impact? If there's a triumph for this guy, is there also a tragedy? And I forget whether we were talking about Luthen's speech first with Young or the ending for Kino, but we were very interested in the theme of sacrifice. And so, I mean, it's so rousing. I mean, I knew what would happen when I watched that episode again recently, episode 10, and I was still like, my pace, my pulse was racing, and to think they finally have made it out to this place where we begin with 2 episodes before, this might be the last breath of fresh air that you ever breathe in, and here they are breathing that fresh air, and there's freedom in front of them. I remember it was in the room, and I don't remember who said it first. Maybe it was me, maybe it was Tony, but you're putting yourself in the physical space of, now I finally get to dive into the water and try to swim for my freedom. And I think we were trying to do just the math of like, okay, how far away from the shore? Is it a mile? Is it 2 miles? Can these guys actually, how many of them are going to make it? Are there going to be TIE fighters coming in? Like, what does it take you an hour to swim? Is that realistic? Like, we're dealing with just like the basic logic issues. And then it was like, what if Kino can't swim?
Wow.
What if, and then you're like, oh my God, he's just led 5,000 people to freedom. Wow. And then you think of the line, I'm going to consider that I'm already dead.
Yep.
Because he knows, even if he makes it out there, that he's a goner. And then you're just like, well, that's when the story almost takes over and tells you what it needs to do. You're like, it's obvious that must be done. It's not even up for debate.
Thank you.
It's really about
these things sort of arise slowly and surely and organically. I wish we were brilliant enough to know that from the get-go, but you kind of have to, yeah.
Hi, my name is Alex from Star Wars Explained. The prison arc, especially episode 10, is one of my new favorite Star Wars stories, and you just broke my heart again talking about it. It's so well done. But the first two episodes are very bleak for a Star Wars story. The balance between despair and hope, that has to be tricky to achieve. So how did you achieve that balance? And were there any moments or situations that you considered for Narkina 5 that you ultimately decided, like, no, that's too far for a Star Wars story?
Well, Sanne can speak more in terms of, if anything down the road ended up being too far, although from what I remember us discussing in the room and working on in the scripts, we pretty much did what we set out to do.
Yes, it did.
Yeah, but I mean, in terms of, look, in the previous 3 episodes, you have the Aldhani raid, there's one episode that sort of buffers between those. But if Cassian's been on the Aldhani raid, this was a one and done. This is, I want some money in my pocket. I got to get out of here. Maybe I'm a little swayed by the manifesto. Maybe I'm sort of seeing the way that the Aldhanis are being treated, and is starting to. I know, what happened on Ferrix, and maybe this is starting to make me feel a little more anti-empire. We know he's anti-empire, but I mean in a more sort of, in a way with more agency. But then he goes off to Niamos, and he's doing what he set out to do, which is take the money and run and disappear. So if you really want to see the process of someone becoming a full-fledged rebel, he needed to be confronted with the full oppressive weight of the empire. And it seemed like the very best place to do that is in a prison that kills hope. You know, if you're trying eventually to get to a new hope, you have to ask yourself the question, why is that hope new? Because that hope was being smothered. So let's see it. But then we know we're going to give the audience some friggin' hope by the end of it, at least. So it's worth the journey, and I hope we earn that.
Hi, I'm Caitlin from Sky Talkers. So nice to speak with you both today. We've talked some about Cassian and the prison, and I wanted to shift gears and ask about Mon Mothma's story in these episodes. We spent the majority of our time with her within her home and with her family. Can you talk about some of the writing choices that led to telling her story largely from within the home thus far?
Well, with Mon Mothma, I mean, first of all, we knew we had the amazing actor Genevieve O'Reilly to bring life to this character, and she's so capable, and so we knew we could do almost anything we want there, and she could pull it off. And if you're asking yourself questions about people's journeys over the course of this series, she's becoming radicalized too, and with her cousin Vel representing the face of someone who's actually willing to get in the trenches, showing back up to her home and reminding her that revolution actually requires violence and sacrifice and danger. Seeing her begin to process that and think about sacrifice in a very real way as opposed to an abstract way is crucial to her story. And how it's sort of, you know, making you think about, okay, you need people that are willing to die for a revolution or a rebellion. You also need people that are willing to raise the money to buy those people the weapons and things they need in order to pull it off. And so it's trying to paint the fullness of the picture of as sort of, you know, disparate and kind of frayed and non-organized as the rebellion is at this stage. How does it begin to coalesce? But then what does it feel like to be in a senator's shoes who has the burden of that on her shoulders? And you know, if episode 10 really does focus on sacrifice, and you're hearing Luthen talk about how he sacrificed everything, you're seeing people like Kino and many other prisoners who are sacrificing their lives for the greater good so that some of them can escape, if not all of them. You're looking at a potential sacrifice, or at least a sacrifice that's asked of Mon, of her daughter. And we don't know what she's going to do yet. Stay tuned. But I hope, have done, you know, the storytelling up until this point to get the sense that being married at 15 years old to Perrin maybe wasn't her favorite thing in the world. And now she's being asked to consider sacrificing her daughter to the same tradition for the greater good. You know,
But also,
ahead,
you know, Mon Mothma has been a character that, you know, we have overseen the public persona, and, you know, and we have seen, a very particular Mon Mothma, and really what ANDOR does, you know, really goes right behind the scenes and takes a character in a different, and shows us a very different aspect of her life. I mean, I would hope that people were gasping when you realize that she is actually fundraising money for the rebellion. And, you know, and I think anything, you know, the humanity of her story and what brings her to become a rebel herself is, you know, automatically brings you also back to your families. You know, it is about, you know, her family connection, and her birth, you know, made her a senator at the tender age of 16 and dictated a lot of her life, and she has given it to it willingly. It's like, you know, she took that burden on, you know, like a queen, you know, kind of descending a throne, and you know, it had a huge personal impact on her life. And the empire crouching down, now compromising also what she tried to believe to do through the Senate, you know, is a human story to tell, and the family connection, the impact of her marriage, her life as a mother, her old friendships. all those things are actually, you know, very much humanity, and show you how hard it is to make decisions when somebody pushes you too far, that you can no longer, you know, be silent and do nothing. But the human sacrifice is huge. And I think therefore bringing us into her home feels very important, and significant, you know, to tell what her sacrifice is and who she is, and why she acts, you know, in the way she does, when we know the perfect persona that she has to play most of her life.
Hello, thank you for your time today. I'm Brian from Pink Milk, where we talk Star Wars queerly. And first, I want to say thank you for creating Cinta and Vel for us. We know in the past that Disney's been reluctant to acknowledge queerness exists. I also want to say thank you to Beau for writing that beautiful dinner scene where her queerness is actively challenged. Many of us queer folks have had to or continue to sit at those dinner conversations, especially with Thanksgiving looming here in the United States. I'm curious if there was any difficulties in creating those two characters, and if so, what sacrifices were had to make to get them on screen?
Well, luckily,
Really,
I mean, as far as I'm aware, there was no pushback whatsoever, as far as I'm aware, and you know, I think, you know, first of all, let me say all credit goes to Tony, sort of in the vision and conception of this show, and I think that, you know, when we were talking about Vel and Cinta early on, we weren't necessarily even talking about them being in a relationship. That was a discovery. You know, it wasn't like, oh, we want to let's have this queer couple here at the center of our show.
no,
We had Vel, which we knew from the Bible was going to be a very important character. She's related to Mon, and we really liked the tension between being the sort of rich girl from Chandrila on the one hand, and then eating the grubs, you know, and sleeping in a tent out on Aldhani. But as we had to populate Aldhani, we wanted these to be interesting people. You know, we're not just sort of like, you know, meat for the meat grinder that are going to get, you know, sort of torn up by this raid. Let's really consider each of them. And Cinta started to emerge.
yes.
Then kind of organically.
Yeah, they had to go out with each other. It just
Yeah,
became
like,
part of the story. We really didn't set out, but it just felt really right for both of the characters, and for the Aldhani gang, and for our show generally, for Vel's choices in life. And, you know, part of why she turned her back on her Chandrilian rich girlness, you know, she clearly had to, you know, fight, you know, for being, you know, it's all the problems that, you know, that we know, that, you know, that it will be in the galaxy as true as they are here on Earth, I think. And it just feels right to, you know, to broaden. If we are going, you know, if we are the kitchen sink side and we're going really, you know, into all these characters and get to know them, you inevitably want to know who they're like and how they live and what makes them tick, and, you know, not only for this one big moment, but generally. And I think the Vel that we meet, you know, who she is and who she loves, and you know, and is really part of who she became, and how she also became the rebel of the cause. So it was just a very natural thing, and we never got any pushback from anybody. And thank God it is 2022 and just about time that we can depict, you know, all of society, rather than only very particular, acceptable, you know, traditional ways.
I think the key, you know, and I hope why it works, you know, is that we started with people out in the world trying to foment rebellion. And that's it. And then who are these people? And that we didn't start with this character is gay, or this character is straight, or this character is bi, or this, you know, character is anything other than let's start with them. Let's drop in with them in action, trying to do something. And then if we arrived at that, it happened organically. So it's not what defines the characters. It's just part of who the characters are. and I think that's how it happened. And then once you've made that choice, you just now have to be in the reality of these two characters and say, okay, what is this relationship? What's right about it? What's wrong about it? What works, what doesn't? And then what are the dramatic implications down the line? I hope that answers your question.
Hi, I'm Brad from Friends of the Force. Speaking of Cinta and Belle, something Cinta says is, "I'm a mirror, you love me because I show you what you need to see," which I thought was an amazing line. Likewise, I think fans are loving Andor because it's showing us what we, the viewers, need to see about this point in history. And I think dystopian stories are at their best when they say something about our own world. So for you guys, for both of you, what sort of big ideas were important for you to examine through the show, whether it be this whole season or this sort of 3-episode arc, and what do you hope viewers see Andor's truth as?
Well, Sanne's been much more front row seat from the very beginning all the way through, so I want to turn it over to her. But I will say that Tony walked into the room saying, "I want to think about this first season as the education of Cassian Andor." Right? Like, what does it take to go from being a sort of self-serving guy who may have a distaste for the Empire but is ambivalent in terms of doing anything about it, to what does he need to go through and experience in order to have a real transformation where he is choosing by choice to walk towards rebellion. And so I think, how does that evolution take place in the human soul? And then you start asking yourself that of all the characters in the show, what evolutions are they going through, and how are they becoming the people they are? And I think a big part of this ultimately, I mean, because we know where Rogue One is going to get us, it comes down to sacrifice, and you feel that very strongly in these 3 episodes. So I think personally, me, and I can't speak on behalf of Tony, although we've talked about this sort of thing a lot, I think the cost of rebellion, the cost of doing something, the cost of doing something that you think is right with big stakes, what sacrifices are you willing to make? If these are questions that are swirling around, I think that's those are not only thought-provoking, but emotionally rich. Sana?
No, I mean, I can only add to that, but it's also, the power that an average person can have when you are pushed to a place where you can't but fight back, and it is a strength to actually move and shift something and be part of rebellion and try to change the world is something in all of us and in everybody. And I think that's why the series focuses on a lot of very normal people that are caught up in a very particular, time within the galaxy far, far away, where really, which are the formative years of the rebellion. And I think what that does to you and how people react is just, it's really at the heart of it, and at the heart of Cassian Andor's journey, that who we know is the rebel that will give his life for the cause. And so kind of at the heart of it, but I'm sure Tony Gilroy put it all much better.
Hello, this is Gabe from Blast Points, and we're huge fans of George Lucas's first feature film, THX 1138. And there appear to be subtle and not so subtle influences in this prison arc to that film. When working on these episodes, was that something that you looked at thematically?
So quite honestly, the answer is no, not consciously at first. We started, as I mentioned before, from a place of how do we do a prison sequence that doesn't feel like every other prison we've seen. We started talking about this sort of bright white antiseptic space. We started talking about ways that you could control the inmates without having to use the obvious like gun to the head or what have you. And so we just started from that very simple place. But writers' minds work in strange and mysterious ways. So I mean, eventually at a certain point, it became obvious, and that there were some of what we were discussing, and especially as we got into production design, bared some resemblance to THX. And then once you sort of realize that, you can be intentional about it, of course. Unconsciously, maybe in one or all of us, George Lucas's first feature film was bubbling forth and we weren't fully aware of it. I mean, you as a writer, you were constantly resurfacing things that have influenced you over your life, whether it's experiences you've had or other pieces of art that you're not always fully conscious of when they're resurfacing, and then only later do you realize, oh yeah, wow, like there is some and I actually, because I assumed someone was going to ask about this, I went back and watched THX again last night and I was like, wow, yeah. Holy cow here. Yeah, there's definitely, but I take that as a good sign. We're channeling a little bit of OG George Lucas, and that's never a bad thing. Sanne?
That's never a bad thing.
Hi, Beau. Hi, Sanne. Alden and Nikki here from Octo Radio. Screens are weird. He's down here. In the current climate, especially post 2016, we've seen resistance emerge across art, especially in TV. And we think Andor reflects that, particularly with moments like Luthen's monologue in episode 10.
So as a writer and producer respectively, how has crafting this particular story personally helped you both unpack your own ideas and emotions concerning today's world?
God, that's a deep question. How long have you got?
Look, I've got all day. I don't know.
Foremost, Andor is a work of fiction, right? And we're working within a beloved and vast pre-existing franchise, and many people have interpreted that franchise back to 1977 in a whole host of ways, and so look, everyone's going to bring their sort of personal history and thoughts and and opinions about the world to the table when they're working on something, but really, our goal is to service the characters that we've created and the story that feels right for them within a pre-existing framework and try to do something original with it. To whatever extent people want to interpret that, or see it through a particular lens and see it as applicable to anything past or present, that's wonderful. It means that maybe you've created something that generates interesting conversations or debates that people could have. In terms of influences for us, I mean, you could you could look at the French Resistance, you could look at the American Revolution, you could look at a whole host of different things that one could draw comparisons to. And but honestly, we're not sitting down trying to think about this in any sort of didactic or essayistic way when we're doing it. We're literally like, okay, so what's he like with his mom at breakfast? Like, what does that look like? And you just try to build a believable world. And when you build a believable world, naturally, and it's a complex and sophisticated world, if you're lucky enough to get to that stage, it leaves a lot open to interpretation, and that's a good thing. Sanne?
Therefore, I think you can really also, in a fantasy, and when you're moving in that genre in a galaxy far, far away, if you're creating a piece of fiction that is telling a truthful and complex and political story that is true to that world, I think it is a real. A lot of people find emotional connections to characters, to situations, and that can touch them, and I think that is a really wonderful thing about fantasy.